My name is Patricia, and I'm 34 years old. Right now, I live alone, but not long ago, I lived with my husband, Carl, in a small two-story apartment. We had a quiet life to save money, but the life I imagined and the reality of marriage were very different. I met Carl at a social event. He mentioned working for a big company, and many women at the event seemed interested in him. We connected because we both loved outdoor activities. After the event, we hung out a few times, and a month later, he asked me out. We were both 26. After dating for 3 years, Carl proposed. We've been married for 5 years, and now I'm living alone again. I feel like I wasted those 5 years. Our first year of marriage was quiet. My in-laws didn't seem to like me much, but I didn't worry since we didn't spend much time together. But after a year, Carl suddenly quit his job. He said, "I wasn't getting along with my boss, so I quit." Before we married, my in-laws had expressed that they didn't like women working, so I had quit my job. Now we were both out of work. We couldn't afford our lifestyle, but Carl didn't seem to care. He just said, "I'll relax for a while," and didn't look for a new job. He spent his days at home, saying he'd gone to the job center and sometimes asking me for money. I didn't have extra money, so I decided to get a job again. Luckily, my coworkers were supportive of me returning to work, but Carl's parents weren't happy. They had never liked working women, so they didn't like it now. I asked Carl to tell his parents I was working again because he quit his job, but he put it off. "I'll tell them soon," he said, but never did. Instead, they found out and called me, telling me to quit and saying it was wrong. I was angry, so I told them to ask Carl why I had to work and ended the call. That was a mistake. Carl had told them I went back to work because I wanted my own money. This made them even more upset. I was furious with Carl and confronted him. He just shrugged. "You know how my parents are. If I told them I quit, they'd freak out. I want you to wait until I find a new job and tell them everything's fine," he said. The idea of dealing with my in-laws' rude comments for who knows how long made me feel stressed. So, I ignored Carl's advice and went to his parents' house to tell them the truth. They didn't believe me at first, so I played them a recording of Carl talking about quitting his job. I had asked him a lot about why he quit and when he planned to start looking for a new job, so getting the recording was easy. When they heard it, they were shocked, but they didn't apologize. Instead, my father-in-law started blaming me. "If you had supported your husband like a good wife, he wouldn't have quit his job," he said. His wife joined in, crying. Their yelling was loud enough that their daughter, Jane, who was in another room, came in to see what was happening. "What's going on?" she asked. Her mother tried to send Jane away, but since I was still playing the recording, Jane figured out what was happening. "I've heard Jane, who's 28 and works remotely, has a boyfriend but doesn't want anyone to know because it would cause problems with her parents or Carl, it seems. Do you really think it's right to gang up on her? And Carl quit his job. You've been attacking her for going back to work, but she had no choice. You guys never think things through. If you're going to back Carl just because he's a guy, then get him a job already," Jane shouted at her parents. Her parents were quiet and looked down. Ashamed, Jane left them and came over to me. "Patricia, I'm really sorry about my brother. He's going to try to mooch off your money when the time comes. Don't feel bad about cutting him off," she said. I smiled at her. "That's the plan. I don't want to spend my life with a man who refuses to work," I replied. Carl's parents were more worried about the embarrassment of being dumped by their daughter-in-law than I was. They kept pushing Carl to find a job, which eventually led to him getting hired by another company 6 months after quitting. He had worked for a big company before, so finding a job wasn't hard, but he looked down on the new company, calling it small and not a good match for his skills. I had a feeling this job wouldn't last long. I was right. After 3 years, Carl quit again. I guess 3 years counted as a win for him. By that time, I had been with one company longer than Carl had, and through hard work, I got promoted to a manager and earned more money. I couldn't depend on Carl anymore. I also needed money to investigate something that had been bothering me. After finding out what I needed, I decided to take action. "Hey, let's call it quits," I said, shocking Carl. "I don't think I can stay with you anymore. Let's get a divorce." Carl was very confident, having always been spoiled by his parents and told he was destined for greatness. When I brought up divorce, he just smirked and said, "Are you sure? It's hard to believe a woman like you could find another man like me." I didn't understand his words, but I signed the divorce papers anyway. Carl thought he was invincible and said, "If you're this stubborn, I'll go stay at my parents' house for a while." enjoy crying in my absence. He quickly packed up and left. This worked in my favor. While he was gone, I submitted the divorce papers, signed a lease for a new apartment, moved in, and started my solo life. The apartment was meant for two, but I had invited someone to stay temporarily, so it wasn't completely mine yet. 2 weeks later, I got a surprise call from Carl. "Hey, you must have had time to think by now, right? I figured out your little surprise plan. Let me in. My parents and the movers are waiting downstairs," he said. "Excuse me?" I replied, confused. I looked down from the balcony at the front of the apartment. I saw a truck, probably the moving truck, but I didn't understand what he meant. Then he cheerfully said, "We're moving in today, all 5 of us. That's why we're moving. Don't keep my parents waiting." I couldn't believe he still thought we were married after signing the divorce papers. Suddenly, I heard his mother's voice on the phone. "Patricia, you're making a lot of money while sidelining your husband, right? That's why he's struggling. You're draining his motivation. If you're the breadwinner, you have no choice but to support him as a working wife," she said, belittling me. I sighed and told her, "By the way, I'm single." There was a short pause. "What?" my mother-in-law said, shocked. "I divorced Carl. I told him I wanted out, and he signed the papers. I filled out my part and finalized it. I'm not going to support a stranger," I said. I ended the call. Behind me, Jane, who was making cocoa, asked, "Was that Carl just now?" "Yeah, it was Carl and his mom. They seem to think I moved in and want to freeload. They were planning on moving in as a family of 5, so they probably included you," I told her. Jane looked uncomfortable. "Oh, sorry, maybe it's my fault. He might have seen my phone or heard me talking to the mover when I was moving." "Honestly, your family has no respect for women," I said. "Actually, I'm sharing the place with Jane. I invited her to stay because her family kept interfering with her. I chose this nice apartment because I figured that even if I moved, her family would still try to barge in if the security wasn't tight, but no matter how long they camp out in front of the apartment, they probably won't be able to get in. Jane's boyfriend is overseas on a work assignment, so we were talking about room sharing for a few years. Even so, I was surprised when her family suddenly changed their attitude about being financially dependent on us. I asked, "Did my mom really say that?" Jane seemed confused. "Up until then, my mom always thought it was inappropriate for women to work. She often told me not to get a job either." I was shocked when she suddenly changed her mind and said she wanted to live off her daughter-in-law. I continued. Jane seemed to realize something. "Oh, wait. Maybe my dad finally told her he lost his job." I gasped. "What? Your dad doesn't have a job?" "It seems he was fired for making sexist comments at work, like saying that women only needed to brew coffee and didn't contribute much because they were women," Jane explained. "Wow, I thought he only acted like that at home." I sighed. It seemed he was spreading his views to others too. Now none of them, Carl and his parents, were working, so they must have been thinking about moving in with Jane and me, since we both had jobs. The fact that they were snooping around Jane's phone meant they had figured out I was living with her. They probably thought, "If Jane is living with Patricia, we can do the same." We discussed it and realized I had no choice but to answer Carl's calls since he wouldn't stop. "Hello? Stop being foolish. Have you thought about this?" "I'm coming back," Carl kept saying. "Why would I let a stranger into my home? We're divorced, so stop interfering," I replied, getting frustrated. "Then why are you living with Jane?" he demanded. "She's my sister. She wants nothing to do with you guys," Jane said. "She left a note at your house," I added. "That note doesn't count. You're still my wife until I say so, and Jane is my sister, got it?" Carl kept arguing. "This is such a hassle. Contact my lawyer from now on. I'm going to sue you for damages because of your cheating," he continued. "A lawyer? Cheating? What are you talking about?" he asked, confused. I sighed. He never asked why I wanted a divorce. I had found out about his infidelity, and that's why I ended it. He was fired from 2 companies for making advances on women at work. Both times, he was caught cheating and dismissed during office hours. He broke up with the woman he was seeing after being fired. The companies didn't want the scandal to get out, so they never told me the truth, but when Carl quit, I hired a private investigator and found out about his cheating. When Carl found out I knew, he tried to blame me, saying, "It's the fault of the person who gets cheated on. Cheating shows a man's honor." I calmly responded, "There's no honor in a man who's broke," and hung up. In the end, Carl and his parents moved back to their old house after apologizing to the movers. They were planning to sell the house and look for an affordable apartment, with a lawsuit hanging over them. Carl and his dad had no choice but to start job hunting, but Carl's mom had never worked and had always looked down on me for working, so she didn't find a job easily. Instead, she stayed home, saying women didn't need to work. As a result, Carl and his dad were angry and constantly fighting. They used to get along, but now they were living together and throwing insults at each other. Jane's friend told us about all the drama, and we realized how lucky we were to get away from that family. This room sharing won't last once Jane's boyfriend returns from his work trip, but she's planning to marry him. She turned to me and said, "I want you to be there for my wedding as my family." I almost teared up. "I'll always support your happiness while chasing my own," I replied. Please leave your comments. We're looking forward to your comments and channel subscriptions. See you in the next video. Thank you for watching till the end.